in Washington, there are people who literally believe, they don't often say, but they believe that the costs of things are too low. They should be higher. That would restrict the number of children people have.
My name is Mike Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be talking about your electric bill is about to skyrocket, and you're going to discover how you will pay for Biden's new green grid. My guest today is Dan Kish. Dan is the Senior Vice President of Policy at the Institute of Energy Research. Great to have you on the show today, Dan. A lot of people out there, I mean, we talk about wind energy and we talk about solar energy, and that's the new buzzword that we have in energy, but no one really talks about the grid and how we're going to get all of this new green energy and who's going to pay for the grid. And I know here in Texas, I mean, we've seen our electric bills skyrocket over the last year, and I think they're even going to go higher this year. So I wanted to kind of get your opinion first and talk to you about, what the grid and how all of this is going to be paid for.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Well, I'll give you a clue. It's you. Uh,
I knew that. I just didn't want to say it.
right, right. You and all your viewers and Americans out there who've been watching this. And that's what they're beginning to find out in now in Massachusetts. Uh, the fact of the matter is that renewable energy has been sold to us is something free. Gee, it's free. You get free sun, you get free wind, and in some cases, it can provide a decent supplement to uh, energy sourcing. I've got some solar yard lights, but I don't think I'd want to run a factory on.
Yeah.
And and of course, Texas leads the country in deployment of wind energy, so you've got a huge amount. But gee, I don't know, was it 10 years ago that there was a huge billions of dollars? I think it was $6 or $7 billion at the time investment that was paid for by taxpayers and consumers to wheel electricity from far-flung wind farms uh, to the consuming areas, to cities, to other areas. So when we hear things like President Biden's been talking about how wind and solar are cheaper than other forms of energy, he's telling you part of the story. The fact of the matter is those systems are diffuse, which means they cover a lot of ground.
Mhm.
They're not very dense compared to the amount of energy we get from oil, coal, and natural gas or nuclear, or even hydro, which is theoretically a nuclear, but performs pretty much like a baseload plant. So what we're doing is we're beginning to run into the real cost of these things. Massachusetts consumers are going to get that bill, and I don't think they're going to be very happy about it. But welcome to the Green New Deal.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. In fact, I was, we here at our commercial properties, we try to book out our electricity for 5 years and, and sign a contract. So our cost, we can control our cost. Uh, and I've talked to my electric provider because our contract is up this year. And I think it's almost doubled or tripled what, the cost was in the past. And the main reason why they explain that to me is simply because of all the green energy and how it's got to be subsidized. And of course, that's what's driving up our electric costs going forward. So I agree with you when people say that all of this stuff is free and, the sun shines all the time and it's free, but, getting it to the consumer is a different deal.
Right, right. Well, and there's the other side of this too, which is I know Texas is considering rolling out a lot more solar
Yeah.
as an addition. Well, at the peak of our dependence on foreign oil, uh, the Middle East was supplying 23% of our oil. China controls 80% of the value chain for solar panel manufacturing around the world. So what we're doing is saying, gee, we want to get off, theoretically, at least that's how this began. We want to get off this oil, even though we don't use a lot of oil to make electricity. It's natural gas
Right.
that's the big dog. Uh, and and we're headed right into the arms of China, supplying our inverters, supplying our transformers, supplying our solar panels, as well as many of the parts for wind turbines and all of the minerals. Just about, they control that and have locked that down. So we're basically, not only are we inviting a Trojan horse into our country with these devices that are going to be spread throughout, that are plugged into our grid, we're we're paying to construct the Trojan horse and pushing them inside the gates,
Yeah,
and it's a
uh,
problem.
yeah, that's the really sad part about all of this is it seems like, because right now, I mean, natural gas prices are relatively cheap, to generate electricity. And it seems to me like we're using all of this, this green energy push to, like you're saying, just to bring China into our country, and then we're going to turn around and buy most of the products that we need to convert to this green energy from China, and it, we're just, as I said, we're just becoming more reliant on a on a communist country, and I think, when you look at Massachusetts and the lawsuits, of course, that have been filed up there, I mean, does that kind of give us a basis of what's coming with this green energy?
Oh yes, yeah. Massachusetts. I mean, I guess what would we expect from Massachusetts? Honestly,
Right.
they've got a long history of this sort of thing. I remember when there were bumper stickers about something about let the free Yankees freeze in the dark. I think there were some down in Texas. Um, but yeah, I mean, uh, California's electricity rates are up 137% over the last 10 years.
Wow.
And they continue to climb. Every time they ask for a rate adjustment, it goes up. And it's because they're having to pour huge amounts of money into a transmission system that they're demanding get larger because they want us to heat our homes with electricity. They want us to, our stoves have to be electric. Our vehicles have to be electric. So they're in essence almost tripling demand for electricity to run everything in this country. At the same time, they're putting it. We're going from a full-time system based on full-time workers to part-time energy, and then the cost of that energy at the time it's producing may not be much, but you have to pay for the other side of that. You have to pay for the 65% of the time the capacity value is not being reached in solar, and the about 60% of the time, and I'm being a little generous, that wind is not performing at its capacity level. Uh, and across the board, what we're seeing is, sometimes I wonder if they're trying to deliberately break the system, because if I was trying to do a job on us and drive up the cost of energy so it would force people to use less, uh, I don't think I'd do much differently.
Well, those are my thoughts. I mean, I look at it, at the whole big picture, and of course, I agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying. Is that, and I'm not even sure, and I wanted to kind of get your opinion on this. I mean, say we went to all electric stoves, we went to all electric cars, we went to, all of these, green deal. Could we even support that with the current grid that we have, or is it going to cost trillions of dollars to put in a new grid system to be able, even if you could support it?
Yeah. An interesting discussion would be to talk with your providers and the people who transmit the power and all the rest about what those costs have looked like. They've they've skyrocketed, just the cost of it. Try to get an electrician. I mean, I don't have to tell you, you're in the business. They're
Yes.
hard to come by.
Oh yeah.
Um, whether it's for your house or whatever, and yet they're jamming, force feeding more electric demand into the system. Uh, Elon Musk says that we would have to at least double the size of our transmission system, which we've built, and we'd have to do that within a very short period of time. Our transmission grid's the most complex system in the world. Machine. That's how it's been described by the Smithsonian and other people. Uh, it is it is built upon the idea that you have sources that when you flip on an engine or turn on a light or turn on an electric stove, the demand is met by an increased production of that electricity. It's a what's called dispatchable. Wind and solar are there when they want to. They're like having a workforce of all part-time workers. Um, the cost of you being able to run your business full time with people that only show up 35 to 45% of the time, which is what solar and wind respectively do, uh, means that you're going to have to dump huge amounts into paying and taking care of those other people that are going to pick up the tasks that otherwise would be supplied by a regular system. That changes the entire dynamics of the grid, and that is going to cost literally trillions of dollars that either they haven't thought about or they're deliberately trying to destroy.
So who actually controls the grid? I know here in Texas, of course, we have ERCOT and we have our own grid, but I mean, as far as these other states, I don't, is it government controlled or?
Well, it's a quasi-governmental, there are some government controls involved, and of course, the public utility commissions, which allow these various rates to be passed along and that sort of thing, have a hand in this as well. Uh, FERC is involved to some degree, but largely it's regional transmission authorities made up of people who specialize in electricity and the like. But if you're in the grid building business, something like this only comes along once every 150 years. We get to build a whole new grid. That's pretty good business.
Yeah.
I don't blame them for that, but ultimately the per usual, there are people who want Washington to take more control of the grid. You'll remember that folks were saying that Texas shouldn't have its own grid when you had that collapse a couple of years ago.
Right.
I don't know. I think I trust Texas rather than Washington, D.C. to run my grid. I wouldn't let those guys near my box at home or under the hood of my car or anything else.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And are these people that run not here in Texas, but in other areas? I mean, are they elected officials or are they basically appointed?
Yeah. Well, because there's a number of different layers, it
Uh-huh.
involves there. For example, a public utility commission in a given state uh, may be appointed, uh, may be elected. I don't know how you do it in Texas. I know that was a big issue at the last when the storm came through 3 years ago. Uh, the makeup of that, but they can also uh, they can also be subject to if you have a state legislature which directs that they change the policy, which has happened in a lot of cases. Um, they will force the Public Utility Commission to do something in pursuit of some goal. Is it climate net zero? Is it decarbonization? You name it. And so it differs from place to place, but ultimately these are people who theoretically know something about the grid, and increasingly they've been people pushed by interest groups, including environmental interest groups who don't want us to use any kind of fossil fuels at all.
That brings up another point. I spoke with one of the ex-presidents of PETA, I guess it was, and he was telling me that, I mean, years and years ago, of course, they were out to save the whales and to save all of the wildlife that was being, slaughtered and now you got these windmills. Of course, they kill raptors. They basically kill all types of birds, and you got these windmills offshore that are driving wells up on the beach, and it seems like PETA's kind of turned a blind eye to all of this, woke green energy stuff and kind of lost their way. At least that's what he was telling me as far as that. They've kind of bought into all this big picture stuff that we're going to save the world by going with wind and solar. And in my opinion, I mean, we need all forms of energy, but, that's not going to happen anytime soon, no matter what the politicians want to tell us.
Well, right, and the whale issue is a real issue.
Yeah.
The government is covering this up because it conflicts with their particular policy. The amazing thing is that we haven't had this problem, or we've been able to work our way through it through offshore oil and gas operations.
Right.
And companies do a great job, and the government is, BOEMRE and the other agencies are involved in that. But when it comes to the offshore wind, because it's something they want, I was reading yesterday someone's lament from the green energy side of things, complaining about how long it takes to permit things. Well, welcome to our world. And it just so happens that it's a lot easier to permit something that is dense, doesn't take a lot of land, doesn't cover up a lot of land or affect a lot of land, which is a type of energy that we've got now largely. But it does take a lot of impact on the land to put up windmills and solar panels and the like. Doesn't mean it can't be balanced. There's a place for all these sources of energy, and we ought to continue to look for other ones. But the idea that we're going to radically change, and we're seeing it in Europe. I mean, we've got farmers who are being told to stop raising certain crops, and they're protesting in the streets. People are beginning to get upset from this. The question is, will so much damage be done before ultimately the political side catches up with the common sense and realistic side of people?
Well, I've had the pleasure to talk to some farmers up in the Midwest, and and actually I've read a lot about this offshore wind, and of course everybody wants to have wind, they just don't want it in their backyard. And I don't know if you've ever stood next to a windmill, which I have out in West Texas, and those things are not quiet. I mean, if you have 10 or 12 of them on your land, I mean, you pretty much ruin your land as far as any kind of sound protection in the future. So they want to push all this stuff out to the Midwest and areas where you have people that work on the land. But as I said, if you've ever stood next to one of them, they're pretty loud.
Yes, they are. And I don't think I'd want that flicker happening, they blocking the flickering. A strobe light in my backyard doesn't interest
me. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And so anyway, when we talk about the Biden Inflation Reduction Act, that, originally it was supposed to pay for all of this, upgrade and everything. And now it's my understanding is that, all of a sudden they're going to need more money to pay for these build outs. Is that what you see happening?
Oh yeah, I think that was a plan. I honestly, Mike, I believe that was a plan. They knew that many of these costs were not going, they could only slap so much on taxpayers. And what they're doing is they're forcing through their subsidies and mandates and the like, they're forcing people to adapt these forms of energy or to adopt them. And then they leave it up to the people, consumers, utility ratepayers, to pay for the costs of accepting these sources of energy. So it's like getting them a little hooked. And of course, what the argument will be is, well, we have to make these investments, otherwise we've wasted money on these wind and solar projects and the rest of them. But they are clearly let's face it, there have been it's kind of, it sounds conspiratorial, but I tell you, in my experience, and it's been a long one in sort of involvement in these issues in Washington, there are people who literally believe, they don't often say, but they believe that the costs of things are too low. They should be higher. That would restrict the number of children people have. We need a smaller population because life would be better with 100 million people in the United States or something like that, rather than making things cheaper for the citizens of this country so that they can live higher quality lives, which has sort of been a history of progress in this country, making people's lives better, making us lazy, I guess, but I don't really want to pull a plow out the field.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, obviously that, that seems to be the goal of a lot of these elitists, is to, reduce the population. But yet, we've got an administration that's allowed close to 15 million new people here in the United States, and we're supposed to go all green, and we're supposed to foot the bill. I mean, where are these people going to get electricity? I mean, are they, I mean, we just keep adding people. I mean, that's more than what, 8 or 9 different, more people than 8 or 9, the populations of 8 or 9 states.
Yes, yes. Well, and it's fascinating because you mentioned PETA and their lack of objection to the offshore windmills. The same has gone for this. I mean, we used to hear huge hue and cry about the population explosion and all the rest, which still, I believe, guides this, is the underpinning of this whole movement. And yet there's no objection to this, which makes you wonder if, again, they're just trying to break the system. I don't know whether that's by design or default, but clearly, the real shame, I guess, the real shame of this is this country has been blessed by God with enormous quantities of energy of all kinds. And the freedoms that our system so far have allowed us to do has allowed people to go out there and, in their own interest, make other people's lives better because they provide them that energy and the rest. We've got tremendous quantities of it. There's no shortage. The only problem seems to be the government's involvement in it, where they want to control everybody's life, tell them what kind of stove and car and whatever else to use. And therein lies the fault. This sort of Budinsky, if you will, as my mother used to tell me, don't be a Budinsky. And there is a powerful strain of Budinskyism in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think some people are making a lot of money off of it. And, I think it's one of the biggest transfers of wealth that we're ever going to see in this country.
Yes.
And, it's a shame. Well, Dan, it was great having you on the show today. Can you tell our listeners how to follow you?
Sure. I'm with the Institute for Energy Research, and our website is instituteforenergyresearch.org.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'd love to have you back again in the future.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure. Good to see you.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.